Hi there, I'm your host McAuley Tucker, and you're listening to The McAuley Tucker Show, the podcast where I sit down with some of the most accomplished and fascinating individuals in the entertainment and business industry. From celebrities to industry leaders, our guests offer unique perspectives and inspiring stories that will educate and inform you. Join me as I sit down with my next guest to cover their humble beginnings, challenges they faced, as well as their accomplishments in life. You are bound to learn something new, so sit back and enjoy the interview. Hey everybody, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the McAuley Tucker Show. Today we've got a very special guest, Eduardo. Eduardo directed and helped create and write this very popular film that you might know called The Blair Witch Project. And today on the show, we're just going to be talking to him about this film, about his number of other films that he's helped on, and just what it's like to be a director and a writer. Also talking about his time on television. So I really hope you enjoy this interview. So sit back and enjoy the show. I wanted to just kind of hear from you. Why exactly film? There's a bunch of other different careers out there. What interests you in going into film over the other careers that you could have gotten into?
Well, film was kind of like a childhood love. And my dad would take me to the movies a lot, and my dad was like a big movie fan. He loved going to the movies and watching movies on TV. And my parents, we're all from Cuba. We immigrated from Cuba back in like 1972. And so he didn't speak English. He still doesn't speak English. So he would basically watch mostly the movies that were kind of understandable without being able to know the language, because back then subtitles were just every once in a while you could see a movie with subtitles, but that wasn't like a normal thing. He kind of cultivated this love and just of the moment of that kind of the event of sitting down and watching a movie, going to the theater. And then I saw Star Wars in 1977 when I was like 8 or 9, and it kind of just blew my mind. It was not only like the movie, but it was like this cultural event. Like all the people around me were talking about Star Wars, like my age, and there's news stories and magazines. And then it kind of got me interested into like how people made movies and how the special effects. So I started like reading magazines about filmmaking and mostly about like science fiction movies, and that was my main thing because of Star Wars. But I kind of like, I remember like making little storyboards for like shooting my own movie. Like I was going to shoot this alien movie, this UFO abduction movie. And I remember I remember the idea of like storyboarding before I guess I learned it, with the Star Wars, like, how they planned the effect shots and everything. They drew everything out. So it really connected with me. And I remember making like little storyboards, but I never shot anything until I was in high school. And I took a TV production class. And all of a sudden, I was like, wow, there's actual careers in this. And there's actual, not just like, director, not only, it's not just Steven Spielberg or George Lucas. It's also all the technicians. And, the teacher really opened my eyes to like the possibilities. And that was in 11th grade. So I guess I was like 16. And from that moment on, I was a filmmaker. Like, that's how I identified myself, for good and for bad. And then and I just loved every aspect of it. Like I just got into like the editing, especially, and the directing, and even acting a little bit, and the lighting. I mean, everything, camera work. Like it was just it was something that I was like, it was like a career that all of a sudden somebody said, hey, you can do this. And I was like, of course I can do that. And then it just there was no looking back. So that's kind of how I initially, became interested in films.
You mentioned a lot of really interesting things there, and you mentioned Star Wars. I know you love Star Wars. I love Star Wars. It's a big part of my family. And here's one question. I'm not sure if you've ever been asked this before. If you were given the opportunity to direct, write, and control a Star Wars project, what would it look like?
I mean, that's a lot of responsibility. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, the whole Star Wars thing, because like if you're given too much responsibility, it seems like there's no way to like win, like a J.J. Abrams situation, or even
Yeah.
Solo. Like the idea of like, bringing to life a young Han Solo, that's a tough thing, because we all at my generation, and I think even your generation, like through your parents or whatever, we grew up watching Star Wars, and the original ones. And I think that like it's just a big, like J.J. Abrams was took on the task of like finishing this this trilogy of trilogies. um and he was just bound to fail, because there's you can't please everybody. And I thought the films were good. I thought that I have my own opinions about them. I love every Star Wars film, no matter how weird it is, or how how I judge them differently. I'm saying? Some are better than others, obviously, but I do love all of them. But I feel like doing something really huge, like close to the Skywalker thing, would be tough. So I would like try to do something with like a much lesser known character,
Okay.
and I would like probably do like a horror, like a Star Wars horror film. um like I love the idea of like, and I know there's been some stuff done about it, but like like stormtroopers and rebels, like a small squad of rebels and stormtroopers stuck on this planet, and there's like these creatures hunting them down, and they have to kind of join forces to like survive. And something like that would be cool. But maybe like some character from the original trilogy, that somebody that's kind of related. I mean, I think it's why like Mandalorian had such a great has everybody loves Mandalorian. And I think also Rogue One was like one of the favorite movies, is that it's related to like the original stories, but you're not following characters that you grew up with. And and I think Mandalorian, honestly, I think the further it goes away from the Skywalker, for me, the saga, the better. Like I like kind of, I like the Luke in season 2 or whatever, especially like in Boba Fett. Or Luke shows up at the end of season 2, I guess, right, of Mandalorian. Or 1, I can't remember. But anyway, to me, I was like, it's cool seeing Luke, but I would much rather just have it be its own adventure. You know what I mean? Like its own story. So I would do something like that. But again, I would probably rather do something in television, like start with directing some of these shows, and then slowly move into like maybe creating my own series. But that's a tall order, man. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
there's no way to win, and that's kind of it's a tough thing that the Star Wars fandom has become that way.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you that because I thought that'd be a really cool question to ask you, since I know you've done a lot of different things, and I thought, why not ask, if you had that opportunity to make a Star Wars thing, what would it look like? So
Yeah,
kind of going back to film, I'm not sure how the timeline goes, but you got into film, and I want to talk a little bit, not a lot, but talk a little bit about, of course, the Blair Witch Project, the film that
sure.
we all know. It's I was doing a lot of research about that yesterday, and then was just like looking into this, and it's quite large. There's like comics, there's like tons of different things. And if I were in your shoes, I would just be thinking like, wow, this is so crazy. And of course you're used to it now. It's been so many years and you're like, I don't know. This must have been like this must be bizarre. And I would love to hear just at the beginning, like, and you've probably shared this story a lot, but I'd love to hear, for those who haven't heard it, how did this exactly come to be? Specifically the story, just how did this progress? Like, how did this go into story to film?
Yeah, we were, Dan Myrick, who I, co-wrote the movie with and
Mhm.
co-directed and edited and everything. We were film school buddies, and we were in the University of Central Florida in Orlando. And we were just kind of hanging out on weekends. And, we're like poor film students, so we really can't do much. And we actually went to a free screening of Freddy's Dead, I think, one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, like one of the latter ones. And the it was the one with Roseanne Arnold or Tom Arnold and Roseanne Barr. So it was, a lot of comedy. It was just a weird movie.
Mhm.
And I liked it. I mean, I love the Freddy movies, but at the same time it was like not scary. And Dan and I were like, man, I wonder, why aren't there any more scary horror movies? Like, when was the last time you got scared? And we started talking about the movies that scared us as kids, and and then we went to a video store and rented a bunch of movies from that time period. And the thing that really stuck with us was this little subgenre of like entertainment in the really in the 70s and 80s, where like there was like these mock documentaries that were, you know, not advertised as mock documentaries. Like they're like at that time there had been, you know, Spinal Tap had been done, I'm pretty sure. So you know, there was already this idea. I think Spinal Tap was in the, I don't know, but
Yeah.
that was one of the original kind of inspirations for like, you know, a fake documentary. But nobody had like done like the whole hoax thing, like saying, "Oh no, this is real," you know, like so. And there was a show called In Search of in the 70s, and it was a documentary show, and it was about all this like paranormal stuff, you know, and those episodes, especially the ones about Bigfoot and UFOs and Loch Ness Monster, were just really scary. And when we rented these, you know, we got a couple of VHS tapes with In Search of episodes on there, we were still scared. You know, we were like in our, you know, early 20s, and you know, we were like, you know, it was like, wow, that's still kind of scary and creepy, and you know, gives us goosebumps. So we started thinking about like how, you know, I wonder if that would work for a modern audience, you know, something where it's like, you know, it's set up as fact, and you know, only the filmmakers know that it's fake. So we kind of went down this rabbit hole, and we ended up that night of, you know, I think the initial idea was like a film crew, you know, obviously because, you know, we were patterning, you know, patterning the pattern we were following was the In Search of pattern. So it's like we were you know, it was like this you know, we needed a documentary team to be investigating something, you know, paranormal. So we were like, okay, this documentary team goes into the woods, they're looking for some kind of legend about something in the woods, and then they disappear, and then their footage is found, you know, years later.
Hmm.
So that was kind of like one of the things, early things. And then also the idea that like, you know, that the audience is kind of stuck, you know, as a protagonist, like you're literally in almost like it's all, we call it POV cinema. It's like almost
Hmm.
like before the term found footage was, you know, was invented. But like, so it was like, to us, it was like the camera is the eyes of the audience and the eyes of the character, and you're traveling through these woods, and you come across this creepy house, and you go inside, and there's like pentagrams, and like, you know, there's like, you know, little bits of like that there's some kind of sacrifices happen in these rooms, and you look down the hall, there's like a door, a creepy door, and you go down into the cellar. So we had that initial idea of like how the movie would end, or, you know, at least a scene from the movie. And then Dan and I, this was like early 90s, and then Dan and I kind of sat on it for a while. We were doing other things, trying to graduate from film school, and he had a feature he was doing. I had a feature, and you know, and then later on in like 1996, we decided to get back together and be like, you know, let's do this. It wasn't even called Blair Witch; it was called The Woods Movie, and that's when we got Greg Hale involved, who was our producer, and then he really kind of like, he had like the kind of a producer brain, so he was like, let's do this and let's do that and let's do this. So we started casting it. We it took us about a year to get all their, you know, ducks in a row. So we shot it in October of 1997, and then we edited all through 1998, and then it was released in 99. We got into Sundance, you know, 1999. And we sold the movie at Sundance, and then, you know, the rest is you know, is history or whatever.
I think it's really fascinating hearing this breakdown and just hearing how this amazing film came to be. And one of the really big parts of this film, and my father talked to me a lot about this when he introduced this story to me many years ago, was the marketing. And so this is a question that I wanted to ask you, and I was trying to find a way to ask you this question. I think this is one of the questions I did have. So, you know, the marketing campaign for the Blair Witch Project was, you know, extremely effective, and, you know, was building buzz and hype around the film. You know, in your opinion, do you believe that movie marketing has improved or declined in effectiveness since this time?
That's a good question. I mean, it's definitely more targeted now, you know, like obviously like they can, you know, they know exactly what kind of person goes to see the, you know, Fast and Furious movies or Star Wars, or, you know, older audiences, whatever, they know, and they know what audience, where that audience is. And they knew it back in that day too. But now, because of the internet, is so like everything is kind of, channeled through the internet, at least, even like information gathering, just audience research. It's all mostly through internet now. So like you have more targeted, able to target audiences better. But the audience now is like bombarded with more things, and also they're more savvy. Like I think people are more savvy to see what advertising really is. And I think, not that we weren't savvy back then, but it was basically TV and radio was the only place you would get advertising. Like, I mean, the web was very small and there was advertising, but it was not really, I don't know how much it was working. You know what I mean? Like the only time back then in late 90s, subscription service was really like, AOL was, kind of the king, and you would basically have to pay a fee to be on there, so and then slowly they began to figure out how to make money with, advertising. But we did Blair Witch. This is before Google, before YouTube, before Facebook. So it was very much like a very limited kind of audience that was out there. And I think, there was more kind of, for us, the advantage of us was that it was literally like being on the cusp of like television, and being like able to like, hey, let's market a movie for the first time on television and see what we can do with it. You know what I mean? We were like kind of, there hadn't really been much marketing for movies on the internet, and or the marketing was just very basic. They would have like a website, and you could like see the actors and the director and a couple of shots, a couple of scenes from behind the scenes footage, but it was just kind of basic stuff. And Blair Witch for us kind of, it was a really good opportunity, because we were like, the whole movie was about, it was a fake documentary. So I was like, all right, so if we were on the internet, if we were for real and we had this footage of these, people being lost in the woods, like how would we market that, and how would we get the word out? I was like, well, we would put a website up, and then the website would have information about, so we just kind of started building this website, and I had some website building experience. So I spent my days building this website and then editing at night. Dan would edit during the day, and he had a girlfriend, so I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. So he had, he went home and hung out, and I basically all I had was, just work, and I was fine with it. It was kind of kept my mind off other things, and, built this website. And so, it was kind of, the way it worked was, I think people didn't know it was marketing, or at least they didn't feel it was marketing, even though they realized it was a movie. And then eventually they found out it was fake, but they still went back to the website. They were still part of this community. It didn't matter to them. And I think that's the big difference between advertising then and now, or at least on the web, is that we were kind of on the cusp of like being able to like throw out information, but and have it out there and have people reading it. But there was no like, there was no way to invalidate that information. You couldn't go like our the 3 film students supposedly went to MC, Montgomery College, which is where I went to college. A simple web search could have found out that those people never went to Montgomery College. You know what I'm saying? Or like look on Facebook and, oh, there's this Facebook thing. Oh no, he's an actor. Obviously this is a movie. So back then there wasn't this mechanism of like, of validating information. So, or invalidating information. And so it just kind of blew up. And again, people were like really into it. And I think nowadays, like I think people are just so, they know they're being marketed to 24 hours a day. So you have to kind of come in and, you have to find a new way in, what I'm saying, like, or a way to entertain them, and I think that's what, like, why funny commercials work. It's like you're entertaining people and you're still getting this message across, so it's not, it's not like a new idea, but we were just on the cusp of this new technology that was going to change the world. And we just happened to have a movie that we were shooting that, we were doing right in 1999, where like the internet was blowing up. And it was a movie that that lent itself to creating, a fictional or a non-fictional, shell around itself. You know what I mean? So it was just kind of perfect timing,
Yeah, and the marketing for this film, like looking through all this stuff, like it's just super fascinating, and it's just really interesting. And I have a friend of mine named Ethan who loves making films, and I'm not sure that it's very found footage, like it's a very
Mhm.
new recent genre of storytelling, but it involves making like social media platforms like Instagrams, links, and it's just like a whole rabbit
Yeah.
hole of things like that. And my friend Ethan like really enjoys that, and so he's like going around with his camcorder and like making fake social media stuff. And so that's one way that I feel like people can pull that off nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key now is like, you're not going to fool people. And
Hmm.
even back then, like, we were aware of the idea of like, if people find out it's a hoax or that we're trying to fool them, people are going to get angry and it's going to be backlash. So we never thought that the movie was going to be marketed as real. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? That was later on when the artisan was like, yeah, we're going to market it as real and we're going to keep the actors out of interviews and, for the first couple of weeks. And, so it was them that really kind of pushed that. But even then, back then, we were very aware of the idea of like being fooled. And I think nowadays, people know they're being fooled. You just have to be kind of like, you have to let them in on it. And you have to make a fun ride. I think people will, I mean, obviously everybody knows that movies are fake, but they still love to watch them. And the same thing with TV shows. They love to watch them because you're taking them on this ride. So as long as you're taking them on a ride and you respect your audience, I think you can still do kind, you can still kind of create that stuff like your friend is doing, just
Hmm.
something fun, like, it's fake, but there's a fun thing like, oh my god, this Instagram account is fake, and this, it's like you love kind of research, and people love that. Some people really love kind of digging deep and trying to find every single detail of a project. It's a fun
Hmm.
way to do it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that about storytelling. I mentioned before recording that I love making worlds and lore and connecting everything. I've got a friend of mine who like does that with his stories. He's trying to like he's got like 1,000 word Google document where he's connecting all his stories together, and it's just there's a joy, I guess, that comes from doing that. With the Blair Witch Project, I was going to ask this earlier. You mentioned that your father, family from Cuba. Did your father have the opportunity to watch the Blair Witch Project? I'm not certain if it was translated into any other languages, but I'd love to ask you that. I'm like, oh, that'd be a cool question to ask. I'm very curious about that.
Yes, he saw Blair Witch. And yeah, I mean, I think Blair Witch came out everywhere. And I'm sure it was translated in certain markets because certain markets do translations, and then some don't. But
Mhm.
yeah, there's definitely a Spanish version of Blair Witch somewhere. I don't know what version he watched. He probably just watched the American version. I mean, my dad watches a lot of movies with subtitles, so I think
Mhm.
he's kind of used to that. But I mean, it's not really my dad's kind of movie. You
Okay.
know, um, like, and my mom, forget it. Her comment was, why is there so much cussing? I think was her main comment.
Mhm.
But at that point, they were so excited about the success, and like kind of, they knew that this was my lifelong dream, and they knew how much like, how much I had sacrificed, and also they knew how much they had sacrificed, putting me through film school and helping me pay for some of my films, and they gave me a lot of money, a lot of support.
Mhm.
And so they were kind of like whatever. But my mom has definitely told me like, why don't you make Christian movies, or why don't you make kids movies or something that I
Mhm.
could watch, because I don't think either of them are horror movie fans. But I did a movie called Exists, which is a Bigfoot movie,
Yes.
and my dad liked that one because it has there's action in it, and um, so I mean, that's the thing with my dad. He really does love action movies, and that's really his kind of genre, his favorite genre. So, unfortunately, I ended up in the horror genre,
Mhm.
so.
It's very encouraging to see that your parents really support you in the film and in storytelling. I think that's very valuable and very important. One thing I
Absolutely.
found fascinating about you is you've done your fair share of horror films. And one question that I was really wanting to ask you, from a director point of view, how do you direct non-horror films? And from like directing a lot of horror films in your earlier years, is it very different? Is it challenging when you initially started directing? I know you've done FBI, some episodes of FBI and
Yeah.
things like that. Like, I'd love to ask you that question. Is it different? Is it very similar?
No, I mean, look, the technique of making movies is, is kind of the same as it's ever been. Like obviously technology changes. We when we shot Blair Witch is kind of you know, the exception because we shot it in a very non-conventional way.
Hmm.
Um, and that was just because it was supposed to be a documentary, so we were like, well, let's shoot it like let's let the actors shoot it and let's make it look like a documentary. That was kind of what we wanted it to look like. But I never, I didn't do a horror movie for a long time. Like I in high school, when I was in high school, Miami Vice was really huge. So most of my high school movies are just Miami Vice rip-offs. And it's just, and also it's like, you're learning, there are more exercises than really films. You're trying to learn how to match cut and like, you're learning the basics of filmmaking, taking baby steps. And then even in college, like, comedy and action really is like kind of what I love. What I used to, I mean, I still love everything, but I always thought that I was going to be, kind of an action comedy filmmaker. That was really what I enjoyed. I did so once I got into, when I did Blair Witch, all of a sudden you're like, wow, you're a horror filmmaker. And I never considered myself a horror filmmaker. And I had to kind of, I had to kind of go back and study the genre a little bit, because I mean, I've always loved horror movies it's definitely not my favorite genre.
Hmm.
Again, probably because my dad didn't really like horror movies. So I always gravitated towards the stuff, obviously, that my dad would take me to. But then once I got a little older and I had a friend and I would mostly go to movies with him, then it was kind of like I, watched everything. And he didn't really like horror movies either. So it was very much insulated. I was kind of insulated from that genre, even though I did watch, Jaws and Amityville Horror and The Exorcist and Shining. Like I would watch those movies, but, I wasn't like something that I was coming back to over and over again. And also back then, you got to realize that back then you couldn't rent a movie. When I was growing up, you watched a movie in the theater or you watched it when it came on TV, and it wouldn't come on TV sometimes for years after it was on in the theater. So it wasn't like you could rent a movie or you could, there's no VHS. I mean, this is before all that. So, it's very limited what you could watch, you know what I mean? But now, like so basically I learned directing for, doing other genres, and then I learned to be a filmmaker. And it's still, I mean, I'm still learning to be a filmmaker. Every time I do a television show, you're learning things and you're, collaborating. And I love the collaboration. And there's so many talented people in this business that you're, constantly being inspired by. And, so it wasn't a difficult transition. And also the biggest thing I took from like my indie filmmaking world or just being an independent filmmaker from, the age of 16 is the pace, like you're moving fast and you're not waiting, you don't have any time to waste. And television is very much like that. You're very much kind of run and gun the whole time. No matter what show it is, you're constantly rushing and trying to get through the day. So that was really like what the main thing that really prepared me. But it wasn't much of a challenge to go back, for me to go back and forth, between genres.
And as you've gone through all these different genres, you're going to learn a lot from those experiences. And I find that really valuable, trying different things and trying different genres. And I've also found it fascinating that you mentioned, horror isn't, your number one genre. You're open and interested in working with other genres, comedy, things like that. And I love comedy films. They're super fun. I really enjoy them. The Blair Witch has impacted, the whole industry. I remember going to the antique mall close to my house, and I'm like, oh look, there's a Blair Witch parody, and it's like made by Pauly Shore, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And so I guess kind of like last question, kind of around the Blair Witch, like what's your thoughts on this huge impact, and are there any big plans for the future involving this story?
Man, I mean, it's kind of like Blair Witch. I mean, the reason I'm talking to you is because of Blair Witch. You know what I mean? Like I owe so much. The reason I'm in this house and I have all this Star Wars crap behind me is because of Blair Witch. it gave me financial stability, and it gave me, career stability. Like, it actually gave me a career. And it was because of Blair Witch that I got an opportunity to direct other films, and then I got an opportunity to get into television. And I feel very blessed to have been a part of it, because it was, obviously just not me. It was me and a lot of filmmakers and the actors and, everybody that came along, people that helped market it, and people that believed in us and gave us money. And, it was of so much of a collaborative effort. And I just feel blessed that I did my part and I was a part of it. And I'm still reaping the rewards of Blair Witch. You know what I mean? So, it's and as far as the impact, it's just an amazing thing. It's just kind of like, again, like we started the interview with talking about Star Wars, and like, not to compare Blair Witch with Star Wars, because Star Wars is its own thing, and it's, a monster. It's, it's the biggest, probably the franchise with the most, the biggest franchise ever, probably, as far as like story wise, like just so many stories in Star Wars that revolve, expanded universe and all that stuff, movies and comics and video games. And Blair Witch is just a small sliver of that. But I never thought that, I would have a movie that could even be compared even fractionally to Star Wars. Like, as a kid, watching Star Wars, I was, never thought, oh my, I'm going to make a movie and people are going to be talking about it 25 years after it's made. And, so again, I feel really blessed, and I feel really lucky that I was a part of it. And again, like Blair, and, I've said this many times, like Blair Witch was like the ultimate serendipity project. Like everything that could go right went right. And it was an experiment that somehow morphed into something that was this special little movie, and people still love it to this day. And so to me, it's like, I owe everything to Blair Witch. So and you asked me earlier, you've been asked every question about Blair Witch, and I'm like, and people ask me all the time, like, are you tired of talking about Blair Witch? And I'm like, you know, never, never tire. I mean, my whole thing is that, like, if you're interested in hearing my story and about my movie that I made 25 years ago, then why would I not want to talk to you about it? It just doesn't make any sense. And you said, like, oh, you've done a lot of podcasts. I'm like, yeah, I do podcasts, because for me, it's like, again, if you want to talk to me about Blair Witch or anything, any of my work, like, why would I not, do that? And I appreciate, people like you, and your interest. So I don't know how to wrap my head around what Blair Witch has become. But I just kind of go along for the ride. And my wife reminds me sometimes, people send me like, oh, you were a question on Jeopardy, or you were this, or somebody on this show mentioned, so it's it continues to give me like so much pride in what we did, and again, like, really lucky that I was part of it.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It's really a real blessing, how well this film, succeeded, and just the whole impact. And it, it's so crazy, and it's really beautiful to see how you guys planted this seed, and it's just grown into this big tree of beauty.
Yeah.
Working after the Blair Witch, working in this industry, there are, and I've speaking with all these guests, there's always challenges that we face, and we learn and grow from these challenges. And I wanted to ask you this specific question: what is the most significant risk you've taken, I guess, in the film world, and how did it turn out for you?
I mean, I risk, like, with every project you make, at least the ones that I develop, and especially with my films, I haven't made that many films, but for me, each of them was like a risk. I feel you have to risk, especially with films, especially if you're writing stuff yourself, like, you have to risk something, or else it's sometimes it's not really worth it. You know what I mean? It's not really worth the trouble.
Right.
So especially if, I mean, and again, like, I do I'm a director for hire. I'll do I do all kinds of television, and people send me scripts for features, and I'm attached to bunch of features that are, trying to be financed and going, studio route, whatever, trying to get green lit. So, it's not like everything I do nowadays is like a risk, but I do feel like there is a certain risk when you go in the television world, when you go, and this is mostly what I do, is you go into a new show that you've never been in, you would work with people that you've never worked with, hundreds of people around you that you've never worked with. Now I've been in the industry long enough where like there seems to be always one or two people that I know, and each crew, and that's really cool. It's kind of like, hey, I worked with you on this, and there's like a connection, and I love that. So there's a risk of like, oh my God, am I going to screw this up? Am I going to like, are people going to like me? Are people going to like what I'm doing with their show? Or the actor is going to be cool? So there's always a risk as, being just like, because you're going into a new setting. But I mean, everybody everybody has to do that. It's your work. You have to go in and figure it out. So, it's kind of unique in my position because it's almost like I have to do a new workplace every time I work. I have to be, and I'm kind of the boss, or one of the bosses. So it's a very difficult situation, but it's challenging and there is a risk. But, so far, most of the time they ask me back, and I'm pretty proud of the stuff that I've done on television, and usually I do pretty well. And then film wise, every film I make has been a risk. People have been telling me not to do it, and there's always been, like all the films I did were independently financed, which meant that none of the studios, none of the Hollywood kind of people really like wanted to make those films. And it's, those were big risks, and sometimes they paid off and sometimes they didn't. But I think, the biggest risk, and for me, it was like kind of a no-brainer, is that I stayed out of LA. Like a lot of, everybody told us after Blair Witch, move to LA, and it really, and it makes sense. It's like, that's really like my career would probably, would definitely be in a different place if I had moved to LA. Now it might be in a better place, but it also might have been in a worse place because I might have like burned out. Who knows what would have happened if I had moved to LA. But I think that was the biggest risk as far as like being in the film business, because whenever I whenever I go on a show and people are like, where, you're from LA, right? I'm like, no, I live on the this, and they're like, whoa, like everybody's surprised, but also kind of impressed that, because I mean, look, LA is a great town, but there's a lot of people that do not want to be there. They're like, oh my God, if I didn't have to be in LA, I would not be in LA. And I was fortunate enough to again, like, be blessed to do Blair Witch, and to all, so that I had this platform that I didn't have to go to LA and live in LA. I mean, you still have to travel to LA. The business is there. You have to do meetings and stuff. But, as far as like, I still live, half an hour from where I grew up, half an hour from where we shot Blair Witch. And so that there is this kind of like, I love being here. And so that, to me, that was like, it's very difficult having a career in Hollywood, in LA, period. It's almost impossible to have a career, outside of Hollywood, so I just feel very fortunate that I've been able to, so far, knock on wood, continue to make a living in this business, and and still work on really cool stuff.
Right. And it's very important, to take every road, every path you go in life, you'll learn something from it, and you'll learn valuable lessons. And I've been told that a lot. And I think that's very important, to look at everything in life and look at it as a way to learn and improve, and meet new people. And you mentioned,
Yeah.
meeting people that you've worked with previously in other projects. And that's always really exciting. And that's why I enjoy working, because you're able to meet different people, and everyone kind of becomes family, and you're able to go on these little adventures, and everybody is just so different. And that's what I
Oh
enjoy.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
work as a barista, so I get to experience that at Starbucks,
Oh
by
yeah.
working there.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think, and also, again, like, the best thing about my job is the people that I work with,
Mhm.
really. And also, another point you brought up is like, you learn way more from your failures than your successes.
Mhm.
you know um like, before Blair Witch, I did two feature films that didn't get distributed first one was, we didn't even think about distribution. Like it was just, second one, we were like, all right, we're going to do this and this, and it never worked out, the way we wanted it to work out. So you learn from that, and you also grow as a human being. You grow. Pain is like the main, the main way you grow as a person. Unfortunately, you got to go through pain, and and also like learning the fortitude of like failing, and then getting back up and saying, all right, I'm going to do it again, even though it's so painful. And that's really kind of the perseverance. And a lot of most filmmakers have that, I think, like the idea of like, Jesus, that failed, but all right, I'm going to go and write another one and do another one,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's you learn all the time. You just got to be open to it. You got to be open to like accepting the fact that you're not going to have the best idea every time. And that's a big part of it too, is just kind of letting your ego kind of take a back seat to a lot of the stuff that you're doing.
Exactly. This question I was really excited to ask you, and this one's a really fun one. If you were able to make only one more movie, what would be the subject matter, and why would this subject matter be important to you?
Wow. I mean, there's
That's a crazy one.
it's a crazy one because I have like this huge Bigfoot movie that I've been wanting to do for many, many years, and you know uh and I have the script, and I think it's a great script, and it's just really expensive, and nobody wants to make a really expensive Bigfoot movie these days, or
Mhm.
any days really. um but there's so I want to do a movie about in Cuba,
Okay.
eventually, or that's what I kind of we had a TV show at Stars that was going to be set in Cuba, and we were like literally going to go and start scouting, and then the rug got pulled from
Mhm.
us under us. Castro died, and then Trump got elected, and then all business and all American business in Cuba ceased. um but I would love to do something in Cuba about like something historical, like it's like an island that has been downtrodden, and the people have been like persecuted and exploited almost their entire history by different people. It seems like somebody comes in and takes over and kills off or takes advantage of the locals, and then somebody else comes in and takes advantage of them, and it's terrible. And it's still it's still like this island that's under constant turmoil, and people are suffering, but there's a spirit to the people there that I've met, and just not only my family, but just people that people I read about, and just there's this and people also that like because I work in Canada a lot, and Canadians go to Cuba all the time, unlike the American people rarely go to Cuba because it's kind of illegal. But the Canadians are totally open. So I get so many stories from Canadian when they find out I'm Cuban. They're like, oh my God, I've been to Cuba this many
I'm a
times.
Canadian too, as well.
Oh yeah, cool. I mean, I love Canada. I mean, it's one of those places where I'm like, I think, I always toy with moving to Vancouver. You know what I mean? I always, my
Mm.
wife, I'm like, we could move to Vancouver and then or whatever. Anyway, but I feel that like, you guys travel so much more than us, and you're open, like you're more aware of the rest of the world. And I get, and so many people are like, oh my God, I love Cuba and the people and this and that. And I'm like, and everybody's the same, like that Cuban people have this spirit. And even though they don't have anything, they're still like enthusiastic about life. And, there's like this kind of undying will to like, to live a good life. And so I'd like to do something historical, like the slave trade. Like the slavery there was really brutal. It lasted longer than it did here in the United States, and it was the sugarcane plantations were like especially brutal. Like the average lifespan of a slave on a sugarcane plantation was like 7 years, and they would just basically like work these people to death and then bring somebody else in. I mean, it was just so brutal. And I've always been wanting to do a movie about because I don't know if you're aware, you're very young, but there was this big TV series called Roots that was it was a mini series and it was huge. I mean, everybody watched it. I remember watching it with my parents, even though my parents didn't know Spanish, English. We watched Roots. So there's always been this like really, connection to that, to that, just that injustice. And I've always thought about making something here in the United States, but, I'm not African American. And I feel like, maybe, those stories probably should be told by, people, African Americans or somebody, closer to that. So the idea of like switching it over to Cuba has always intrigued me. And again, like the more I learn about the slave trade in Cuba, the more, it's actually, even if you can believe it, like more brutal than the most of the United States stuff. So I think that would be kind of the movie that I would like do, if I had one more movie to make. So but I'm so far away from making it. Like I'm doing a little bit of research here and there, but I'm just a really lazy, writer. I have been for a long time. And, but that it would, it'd have to be something important like that. You know what I'm saying? But again, if it was something where like you have to start right now with a script, I would do my Bigfoot script. I think it's, which is also a period piece. Anyway, that's the long answer to your question.
That's all good. No, and that sounds like you were talking about that. I'd love to watch like a film about that, because just hearing that history, I enjoy dramas. I enjoy those types of things. But that honestly would be such an excellent film, and that'd be
Yeah.
really just specifically that, and it just specifically tackling that subject, just understanding what it was like in that situation, and kind of wrapping up. I always ask my guests kind of the same question. There's a lot of young people, a lot of older people that listen to the show. And I like, as mentioned before recording, I try to make these conversations and talk in a way where we can tell people about the world. And we have done that, the entertainment world specifically. Like, what's one thing you would want to pass on to the listeners who are watching or listening to the show that you think that they could apply to their everyday life that will help them on this amazing journey, whether it be filmmaking or, any other career?
Like, I mean, I'm not a scholar, a philosopher, but I mean, in you look, I look back at myself, my life, and there's so many times when I was so cruel to certain people, sometimes to just people in my school, and I was a little bit of a bully at times, and just kind of, and again in my 20s, like having this ego of like I'm a filmmaker and this and that. And even though I don't, I'm a pretty nice guy, there were a lot of times where I just kind of lost myself. And then in the film business, I found, and in life, I found that like nice people actually don't finish last. You know what I'm saying? Like good people don't I mean, to me, like I think that there's always examples of people that are yellers and just, especially in the entertainment industry, where like, oh my God, this person is such an egomaniac and this and that. And as long as you can make money, you're a good filmmaker or a good actor, people will like kind of let you get away with that behavior a little bit. And now it's less, but before, we all know horrible stories of the abuse that people, have that has happened in the film business, entertainment business. But, I've learned in my life that just being cool and being a nice guy, and it is just so helpful and just so much better than the opposite. Like, don't, like, whenever I go and meet somebody or I hear about an actor and they're like, oh my God, they're so cool and they did this, and I'm like, yeah, of course. And that's why they succeed, and sometimes you run into people, or you see somebody, especially somebody like, I like me, who, knows about the entertainment industry and and realizes how hard it is to have a career. Like it's very hard to have a career at all in Hollywood, let alone have a career that lasts, long, like that's kind of the, you see all these people just come in and then leave, and then they're gone, and people are like, what happened to this person? Oh, they're, whatever, something happened and they're just not working anymore or whatever.
And that's very important, treating people with love, love your neighbor as yourself, be kind, and show love, and, be a wise person.
To me, it's like be positive, maybe be a Robin Williams, you know what I mean?